In the previous video we installed an FTP server. FTP is great for transferring files, but it is quite clunky in that we have to install a separate piece of software to actually use it properly. Fortunately, software exists which allows us to integrate our network drive directly into Windows itself, called Samba. To install Samba, we simply type sudo apt-get install Samba and Samba common bin. This will go ahead and download all of the packages and install it for us. Once Samba is installed, we're going to need to go ahead and configure some of the options. So to do that, we're going to type sudo nano /etc/samba /smb.conf. There are a whole host of different options that we can configure in here, but for now all we're going to do is to allow other users to connect, which we need to do by finding the file which begins security equals user and make sure that there is no hash before it, which in this case there isn't. We then need to scroll down until we find shared definitions, and we need to make sure that read only is set to no. We're then going to go to the very bottom of the file, and we're going to add in some other settings of our own. We're going to, in square brackets, type shared, and the first line in here is going to be a comment, which for our case we're just going to use Raspberry Drive. The next line will be the path. In our case this is going to be mnt sta1, and this is going to point to the USB drive which we connected in an earlier video, a link to which is on screen right now. We're then going to set the valid users. Which we're going to set to @file server. And then we're going to set force group to file server as well. When we were talking about users, we did briefly mention permissions, and we need to set the default permissions here for all of the files and all of the folders. So we're just going to create a mask which will be 0660. We're then going to set our default directory mask, and in this case we're going to set this to 0771. Finally we're going to set read only to no. If we exit this, saving it in the process, we then need to restart Samba so that the changes can take effect. To do this we need to type sudo /etc/init.d/samba space restart. At the moment we haven't actually created any users with the appropriate permissions to connect to our server, and so we can do that now. In the previous video where we talked about creating users, we only talked about the very basic setup. In order to create a user who has the permissions to add files to our drive, but isn't likely to connect and use the Raspberry Pi as an actual server, we can use a different type of user add command. To do this we type sudo user add instead of add user, and then the name of the new user. So in this case it will be stretch files. We then leave a space and add -m, another space, -g, and then specify the group that this user is going to belong to. So in this case the file server group, and hit enter. And you can see that we're going to get this error message saying that the group doesn't exist. And so we can go ahead and create that as well, for which we use the sudo group add command and then specify the name. So in this case we're going to call it file server. So if we try our user add command again, we can see that it works correctly this time. We haven't however set a password for our user, and so we can do that now. And because we're going to be using the sudo command, we can do this without actually logging into that account. So passwd, and we're going to set this for the stretch files user. So we can go ahead and add the password in there as well. And it always helps if you type the password correctly. So now we've created this user, but we haven't actually given them the correct permissions to actually connect directly to the Samba server. To do that, we need to type sudo smb password -a stretch files, which is going to ask us for a new password for this user to connect to the Samba server. So now that we've created this user, we can go ahead and connect to our Raspberry Pi Samba server using Windows Explorer. And to do that, we simply need to go to My Computer and add a network location. If you click Next until you get to the option where you can specify the IP address, all you need to do is type the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. Which must be preceded with 2 slashes. You also need to include the name of the file to be created, which was inside of the square brackets, so we can simply type shared. If we type in our username and password, we are then able to map that onto our network drive. So we can just click Next and Finish, and we're able to access our files directly from our Windows computer now. So we can create a new file. Then if we navigate to our drive within our workspace, which was in cd mnt sta1, and list the files, we can see that we've created our new file on our Raspberry Pi directly from our Windows computer. We could of course copy and paste files across, or do anything else that we would normally do with files. But the important point here is the fact that this is now showing us a drive on our computer, which we can then copy and paste files across to, without having to go through all of the difficulties associated with FTP. Up until this point we've been using sudo apt-get to install all of our programs, but there are alternatives available. Over the next few videos we're going to take a look at a few of those different options, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss them.